Defending Utah covers the stories others are just too often afraid to touch.
They don't nibble around the edges when it comes to pointing out threats to our liberty. They're not afraid to name names and call out organizations.
This is Defending Utah Radio, every Friday morning at 9 on K-Talk 1640. Defending Utah. Think right and wrong, not right and left. Join Defending Utah, because if you're not already on a government watch list, you should be.
We have a special guest on today, James Corbett of the Corbett Report, and coming to us from Japan. And so this is a pre-recorded broadcast, but we're doing this so that James doesn't have to be up all night. And anyway, he is very well known for his videos revealing the truth about 9/11 and many other conspiracies globally, including the wars and the elites and how they function. And he is a very good source for truth if you're searching online. In fact, one of the few YouTubers that's still left, most of them have been completely censored off the internet. And James, because of his original content, has managed to survive a lot of that, and for having his own website and maintaining it so well. Anyway, we're just privileged to have you on, James, and hopefully I did an okay job of presenting your what you do. But maybe
well, you did more than okay, because you mentioned my website, which is something that a lot of people leave out. They always say, "Oh, look him up on YouTube." No, don't look me up on YouTube, because it's getting harder and harder to do so. And someday I am going to be censored off of there. Look me up at CorbettReport.com, where I have everything backed up. You can get it from my servers. You can get it through alternative media platforms. I have a lot of different ways to get the material, not just YouTube.
In other words, you're forward-looking, and you know what's coming down the pike. We just did a show with Jeff C. on media censorship, and I think he's had I don't know, at least 10, 15 channels destroyed, and I don't know how much content he's lost in the process, but I'm glad you've been backing things up.
Yeah, well, I've been talking about this since I think 2008 or 2009. I remember there was something called veracityvideo.com, I think it was, at that time, that was this like, YouTube's getting censored and controlled. It's bought out by Google, and I was all on board with it, and I was backing things up there and trying to promote it. It actually got too big, I think, at a certain point, and they just didn't have the server space and the bandwidth to deal with it, so it went under. And that's the way that a lot of these alternative platforms have been going until recently, the last several years. And now we have web torrent technology and IPFS and other ideas for how to distribute this so that we actually can compete with a Google or something like that has obviously billions of dollars to invest in infrastructure all around the world and serve out these videos. It's never going to be as convenient as YouTube. Of course, that's the easiest and most convenient way to get information, because you just click it, it works. Of course, they have this incredible investment behind it.
Servers everywhere.
Yeah, but convenience comes with a price, and that price is freedom. And if you care about the freedom, you're going to have to take a little bit of inconvenience and maybe teach yourself a thing or two in order to try out some other platforms. It's not even that difficult. I mean, my website, there's a big player there that's linking from my server. You just click the big play button. It shouldn't be that difficult, but people are just so ingrained in their habits of convenience.
Yeah, it's true. And then speaking of tyranny and freedom, here in Utah, we've got probably the largest, I think it's the largest data center in the world.
The NSA Spy Center is located right here.
We drive by it every day. In fact, there was a fire. I was just driving up north earlier. There was a fire off next to it. And I thought, oh, good, is it burning down? And such luck.
Actually, before we were recording, I said I know nothing about Utah and I've never been there. But I did do an interview years ago about Nullify the NSA with Michael Meharry of the 10th Amendment Center, and he was talking about
fantastic.
Yeah, he was talking about the NSA Center there and how people the movement to try to get stop the water supply to the NSA data center and what have you, so they couldn't cool it, so they wouldn't be able to run it. That kind of thing. Great idea. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work yet, but it's a way to start.
Working on it. And just for our listeners as well, just kind of more an introduction. One of your videos, beyond just the kind of covering things that the real news that isn't talked about, you also do a lot of really good history videos. I loved your World War I history series. And that was something we actually passed out to all of the Defending Utah members, and I spread it out to my influence, because that was just, it's important sometimes you forget that understanding history helps you understand what's going on today. And so that was a really, really good video and a really important video.
And that's exactly why I made that. It was 2014 that I started thinking I should do a World War I documentary because, 100 years. And I was thinking about the different parallels, and there's just so many different things that match up with what was going on 100 years ago. And we didn't learn the lessons of 100 years ago. So it ended up taking me 4 years to put that together and eventually get it out. But I'm glad I did, because I do think it is important, and it's an important piece of history. But on the censorship note, guess what YouTube did? They age restricted parts 1 and 2. So you have to be signed in 18 years of age to watch my World War I documentary.
World War I.
Wow.
You must be of age.
I've got a 16 and a now 18-year-old, and just last year I made them watch that for their world history class.
Yeah. This is the nightmare scenario for certain people. Chris Hayes did a tweet of MSNBC. He did a tweet several months ago about, imagine you're a high school student and you're assigned a project on the Federal Reserve, and you type Federal Reserve into YouTube and you get this. And he posts a screenshot of my Federal Reserve documentary. You're like, oh no, think of the poor children. It's kind of funny. But as he said at that time, if you type Federal Reserve into YouTube, I think it was either number 1 or number 2 search result. The next day after he made that tweet, you type Federal Reserve into YouTube, it's not there anymore. And then I get people saying, well, if you type in Century of Enslavement, History of the Federal Reserve by James Corbett, it's right there. That's not the point of this. The point is people are searching for Federal Reserve and trying to find information about that. I'd like them to see this information. Yeah, and of course, that's what they're going to clamp down on.
The level of censorship is just off the charts. I mean, it used to be, and I did a lot of my waking up with YouTube. Of course, your 9/11 video was part of that, and along with a lot of other content out there. And it just within the last 2 years, it seems like now, unless you're looking for CBS and NBC, you've got to go elsewhere.
In a sense, we were in the golden age from about 2005 to about 2015, 16. And I knew that at the time. As I was experiencing that, I kept seeing how the TV land, the TV anchors and whatever would poo-poo and dismiss the internet and blah, blah, blah. And I'm living this reality of seeing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people starting to turn online for information. And it's just so incredibly obvious to anyone but those trapped in their little beltway mindset or whatever, that have blinkers on, that can't understand. The dinosaur media is gone. It's done. Now, unfortunately, the Eye of Sauron is on the internet and what's happening there. So now they know exactly how important this is, and that now we're starting to see the real crackdown. It's been there for a while, but I think it's really happening now.
Yeah, we got to pull those contact lens out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a new censorship I've been experiencing, specifically with your channel on YouTube, is within the last, I think, probably 2 or 3 months now, YouTube basically refuses to autoplay your channel. So every time I play something from your channel, now it goes to a TED Talk or like BBC. Or something. And that one's new censorship.
They're definitely, part of the algorithmic change is recommended videos, and they've said they're not going to be recommending conspiracy theory videos. And I'm sure I'm in whatever, backdoor kind of classification system they have. I'm in the conspiracy crackpot theory section, I'm sure. So I don't get recommended as much anymore. It occasionally happens. I was quite surprised. I saw my recent Secrets of Silicon Valley video being recommended to me on my phone. and sometimes I'm signed in as me on my desktop, and I still get my videos recommended to me. I'm like, what's the point of that algorithm? I don't even get that. But this was me signed out on a different device, and I was getting it recommended to me. So I'm like, oh, well, that one broke through somehow.
Yes, the redundant Department of Redundancy probably did it.
Well, but yeah, it's definitely the search. Search is getting more and more difficult. I actually did an experiment recently on a different device. I just typed in Corbett. You'd think that would be pretty straightforward. I mean, there are other Corbetts. There was some Tom Corbett, governor of Pennsylvania or something. There's some Corbett National Park in India.
Yeah, who cares about that guy?
Some stuff, right? Yeah. But so I'd expect a bit of that. But it was like literally, you got Corbett Report channel and Corbett Report Extras channel, but all of the video content, it was all either people interviewing me or reposting my stuff. None of the videos were from my channel. So again, they're doing this. It's starting.
Well, and I have to say, if we ever get the chance to create our own news network, my nomination is for you to run it. When it comes to,
I don't need another thing on my plate.
yeah, and hopefully it can generate some money so you don't have to just do this for fun. But that's, I don't know. I consider you somewhat of a prophet in the media world of conspiracies and seeing what's coming and being able to tell what's on the horizon. But
it's the robots, the rise of them.
But I guess a good question for you, James, is how do you filter and find your sources? How do you find information? What sparks your interest and gets you going with the topics of the day?
Are you an archive searcher? Ben has spent probably thousands of hours at very expansive libraries in person. What is your
not enough. I'd like to be.
You can never do enough, but
well, yeah. I mean, again, there's nothing in the world I wouldn't want to know more about if I could just download it from the Matrix or whatever. But no, I don't do a lot of archive and document deep dives, or at least not nearly enough or as much as I should. My role, essentially, I'm not the gumshoe investigative reporter that's digging skeletons out of closets. I am more of the guy that's kind of taking stuff that is out there and consolidating and trying to piece it together in a way that'll make sense to people and tell a story so that they understand the information that's important. So I'm always trying to that's one of the reasons I always point back to source documents. Look, this is where this comes from. This is what you should be looking into and concentrating on. Don't take my word for it. Look at
a lot of focus on the fundamentals. It seems like you're very good at taking the fundamental principles and then applying it to what's happening today.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think essentially I'm an academic that's not in academia. I got out of it, thankfully. I was on that track and I got my master's degree in Anglo-Irish literature in Dublin, and I could have gone down that path, and I would not have been a stellar academic by any means, but I could have made a career out of it, I'm sure. But I didn't. I could not think of anything more horrible than the idea of doing 7 years on some PhD thesis on some extremely tiny little topic, and everything in the world about stories written about cyborgs in the 1940s or something, or whatever it is, some ridiculous piece of trivia.
I believe they were called automatons back then.
I want you to do a video about that.
Oh, you know your stuff. Yeah, very good. Yeah, no, I say that because one of my TAs in one of my classes was doing a thesis on robots and automatons in literature in the 1930s.
I was like, I'm sorry, Corbett.
You're right. But there you go. So that's kind of anathema to me and who I am, and I never wanted to go down that road. So I never wanted to go down this road. I never thought I would be doing this kind of work, but it just kind of happened. I was getting all this information. I'm like, well, I got to get it out somehow. So what I do essentially is what I was doing back in my academic days is writing essays. Essentially that's what I'm doing. Now they're in the form of podcasts or videos or articles, but they're essentially like essays, and you just take, you understand this from a certain perspective. So you take this piece of information, and go, hey, look, those pieces fit together, and look, this makes a story. And that's essentially what I do. So I would like to be the guy sitting there in the archives and digging out documents that no one's ever seen, but I tend to be more the guy that's synthesizing stuff that other people have researched. And that comes through something like the World War I conspiracy, where, you want to give props, give it to Doherty McGregor, who wrote Hidden History of World War I. That's incredible, awesome research that they did. It's extremely thoroughly documented, several hundred pages. Actually put their two books together, it's over 1,000 pages. It's incredible. And then a guy like me comes along and takes and synthesizes that information into a sort of watchable, 90-minute documentary. And which is millions of people watch my documentary, and, maybe thousands of people read the book. It's kind of a travesty that way, but this is my role. This is what I do.
But I think along those lines, something that we get asked a lot is, how do you know who to trust? Who do you go to for trustworthy news? And, because you're talking about synthesizing, but that means you've got to filter through a whole lot of garbage before you get something that you can synthesize. And so what are some of the tools that you use, either mentally speaking or otherwise, to be able to filter through the garbage and narrow it down? Because how many books are there on World War I where most of them are just propaganda to promote, the globalist agenda?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because as I did a follow-up, a Q&A about World War I after I released the documentary, where I went through a bunch of the books that I consulted. And Hidden History of World War I or Lord Milner's Second War or those types of books. But then you have the very mainstreamy books, the Barbara Tuchmans and what have you, that, just repeating propaganda. And how do you discern the difference? Well, there are many ways that I can avoid this question. One of which is to say that any criteria that I give you for how to decide, what is good or bad information is something that you could be using yourself, and you should be using, for example, on me. Well, why would I trust what James is saying? So, we have to have that critical thinking layer on for everything. There is no, okay, you can trust this, but you can't trust this. That I wish it was that simple, but unfortunately it isn't. And even in the mainstreamy propaganda stuff, there is true information. You have to be able to sort out, okay, this is true and verifiable, and this, but it's leaving out this part of the puzzle, which actually helps it make sense, or something like that. So there's many different ways to approach this. I try not, there are very, very, very few sources that I would say, I'm not sure there's anything I would say I 100% trust in every sense. And there are very few that I would say I don't listen to a single thing they ever say, because they're always wrong. There's generally some admixture of truth and lies in everything. So you have to cast your net widely enough, but you also have to be grounded in a sense that what is going to be, at least what the bias or agenda of any given source is, because that's another point I've made many times. I have a podcast episode on it about the myth of journalistic objectivity. Of course, any journalist wants you to think that they're sitting there floating on a cloud and I have no bias. I'm just presenting this side and letting you decide, which is nonsense, because there's no story in the world worth reporting on that has a this side and that's it. No, there's always many different perspectives, and who you leave out is as important as who you are presenting to your audience. In many different ways the bias sneaks in. I have my own biases and agendas and where the perspective I'm coming from and my own beliefs and ideologies, and to pretend that doesn't have some effect on my work or the way it's presented is nonsense. Right. So you have to understand, James is an anarchist, he's not Republican or Democrat or left or right or that kind of thing. So he's going to come from that perspective. And when you have that filter in place, then you can go, okay, so he's saying this and but he's leaving out this, or he's a shill for whatever. But as long as you understand the perspectives that people have, then you can at least start to understand where their information is coming from and what other types of ways you can explore to see, is there something over here? Is there something over here? That's a lot of critical thinking. And I realize, A, not everyone has the ability to do that, but B, not everyone has the time to do that. Yeah. That's why it's so much easier to say, just trust this source, just go to this website and just go to Corbett Report and you'll know everything there is to know about the world.
Ditto on that one, because I'll just say on my short list, that's the Corbett Report's at the top.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the sentiment behind it. But look, from my perspective, I get dozens and dozens of tips and emails every day. You should look at this. You should interview this guy. You should look over here. Look at this story. Don't talk to that guy or whatever. I get all sorts of feedback like that every day. And some of it, I'm sure, is valid. I'm sure there are many different things. Oh, yeah, that's an incredible story. I should be looking into it. But I can't. I physically cannot do it all. So, I hope that the information I present is as true as I can make it, as straightforward as I can make it. I try to be as honest and open as possible with my sources and what's happening and what I'm presenting. But even so, even if I was absolutely perfect, and you know what, I do make mistakes, I am human, but even if I was absolutely perfect, I'm still can only present so much as I can present. And I'm literally a guy here in my living room in Japan. I do not have the resources to report on everything that's going on in the world. So you have to
at least you're not like the Snopes, where you're a guy and his hooker in the basement. So
yeah. Fair, true enough. Or the Syrian Observatory on Human Rights, which is a guy in a
you're like Wikipedia, you're a guy living in your mom's house in your basement. In her basement. You're in a living room, so
it's respectable. Right? There's my living room, no less, not my parents. There you go.
There's not hookers like just off screen.
Let me check. No, they're hiding away. There's a guitar.
Okay, good. All the people that can't see it, I just confirmed. No hookers. James Corbett has no hookers.
No. I do have my daughter out there somewhere.
Okay, good. And
it's a good thing you're wearing headphones when we're talking about hookers.
Yeah. I plan ahead.
That's right. We'll keep it under wraps. So James, if you had to characterize where we are and where we are going as a society, maybe, and I'm also curious about America versus the world. Like, how is it different out there? Where would you put us? And then how do we win? I guess that's the I'm curious about your feedback on that.
What's the question again? America versus the world, and how do we win?
Where are we? Where are we going?
Okay.
You had to do a big picture summary of what's
Well,
happening
yeah.
in terms of the conspiracy.
My big picture summary doesn't revolve around the nation state structure that we are handed, because I think that is a construct that is used as a tool in and of itself to get certain people thinking in certain directions. As an example, I will point people back to my World War I conspiracy documentary, where, of course, everyone in all sides of that conflict are motivated by king and country, or whatever the equivalent was at that time, that they're doing it for this reason, that they're being presented by their leaders, misleaders, psychopathic rulers, whatever. And this is what's happening. When in reality, of course, there's several layers above that in terms of manipulating both sides of the conflict and all of that. And I think that plays out time and time again throughout history. I think it is playing out today. So that, for example, it's the United States versus China in this trade war, and maybe it'll become a military war. But as I've talked about in my podcast at some length and many times, I think this is a manipulated conflict too, between people who are collaborating on both sides of that US-China divide and have been for decades, laying the groundwork for China to become an economic competitor of the United States. Why would they do that, James? Is it David Rockefeller and people like that? Aren't they good, true blue Americans that want America to win, America first? No, they don't care at all about the United States of America. They do not subscribe. People at that level of this reality do not subscribe to the nation state system. They do not feel any more affinity to you than they do to a transnational elite on some other side of the border. I mean, obviously they care more about their transnational elite friends than they do about average guys in Utah or whatever. That's how this game works. I'm not saying that there isn't something to do with nationality and your culture and who you are and all of that. That's important. But I am saying that this is used as constructs to pit people against each other always for the benefit of people that are several rungs up the ladder, that are doing things that most people have no idea about.
Well, like even Cecil Rhodes was talking about, how he wanted hegemony for British, the British Empire, but maybe that was just what he said publicly.
Well, no, I think there was a genuineness to that ideology, but of course that brings with it so many different smuggles in so many different assumptions about, for example, what is the place of a Canada or an India or a South Africa or whatever it is in that system, and so what place do they have in that? And then there's also the question of America, which at a certain point in the development of that Cecil Rhodes Roundtable, they had to admit was one of the rising powers at that time in the turn of the 20th century. So Cecil Rhodes started talking about we need a parliament of the English-speaking peoples. It'll meet in Washington for 5 years, and then it'll meet in London for 5 years, kind of thing. And how will we merge these into some sort of supranational ruling oligarch of the world kind of thing? And I think there was a genuineness to that. I think that he really did aspire to that. But of course, again, it's not for the benefit of the average coal miner in Newcastle. My family roots go back to Newcastle, and the coal miners there. Obviously, they weren't going to benefit from this glorious British Empire that Cecil Rhodes was constructing. It was for his business associates like the Rothschilds and the international bankers and the people who really run the system. And that's what it's about. But yeah, I think he really did adhere to those beliefs. But it's the question of what do those beliefs contain? And newsflash, it doesn't contain, oh, I love each and every one of you because you happen to
they're the
live in the same geographical region as me or something.
They're the inter-party members, and they're gonna win no matter what. That's their
But people do it is an effective propaganda construct, because then people can be rallied around to support the people who don't give 2 cents worth about them. I don't care about you, but hey, we're all on the same team, right? Because look, I'll wrap myself in the flag, and therefore you have to support what I'm doing.
That's an important aspect I think people forget about is, yes, they're trying to build a global government, but I don't know if you've read this issue of Foreign Affairs. This is from the March, April of this year. Foreign Affairs talking about the new nationalism, and it's all about how they have to promote this nationalism and how that they are using that to be able to pit people against each other.
Yeah, interesting. I will have to read that. I'll read that because I wrote an article a few years ago for the International Forecaster called "How to Really Defeat Globalism," It was part of a series I was writing, talking about North American Union and things like that, and the problem, the danger of globalism, global government, and why it should be opposed. But then my point is that, yeah, so it seems like, okay, we got to go against globalism, so we got to be nationalists.
Right.
My point is saying, no, you don't understand the broader perspective here. Globalism is kind of this ideology that everyone can be put in this incredibly broad collective, and we'll all be lumped in together, and we'll all worship the United Nations or whatever it is, and sing our allegiance to God Emperor Obama or whoever gets appointed, right? Yeah, nonsense, and it should be laughed at. But what is the real alternative to that? Oh, okay, so no, we won't have this global collective. We'll have a national collective. And yeah, it won't be the UN flag, it'll be the US flag. And everyone will pledge their allegiance to whoever happens to be residing in the Oval Office. And that will be the way. Well, it's the same game. Nationalism is a stepping stone on the stage towards regionalism, is a stepping stone on the way towards globalism.
They're playing Risk with us, basically.
That's one of the perspectives. And you get this most vividly when you go back to the roots of the nation state ideology in the nationalist system, when you start looking at people like Johann Fichte in Prussia at that time, back in the 18th century, people like that were starting to write about, okay, we need to start inculcating this idea of the nation state and the fatherland. And how do we do this? Well, we've got to start indoctrinating the children. So we're going to have a national education system so that we can do this. This is why the Prussian education system became the model that was transported to America. It was the model for the system that's used in Japan, because it fosters this collective idea, and, oh, we all have to do everything for the nation state and give ourselves over to that. It's just, and then once people have really internalized that and subsumed it, so now, okay, I'm following this flag, or I'm following this entity, this puppet thing, whatever it is, then they just switch it out. US flag, UN flag, hey, yay, it's just a mental barrier, a stepping stone towards the next part of this. And I think that's the insidious part of it. The real answer to globalism isn't another form of collectivism, it's individualism. And that's the part that's neglected and won't even be talked about as a potential for how to really combat what's going on.
And so that's the other question is, combating what's going on. How do we have success, and what constitutes success? I mean, how do we know that we're winning, even in our little microcosm in our neighborhoods, or more than that?
Well, I know this is an answer that isn't going to satisfy everyone, because it's not tangible. You can't reach out and touch it. The easy way is to say, next time that you get an election, just go and vote harder and vote the right person in, and then everything will be better. Nonsense, of course. But then what is the real alternative? I think something that I keep going back to time and time again in my work is that there is incredible amounts of money and intellectual machinery and resources put towards propagandizing the public in various ways. In fact, I have a weekly video series I do, Propaganda Watch, where every week we examine some ridiculous piece of propaganda and show how it's working and why it's working, and how can we take this apart, and can we use it for good, and whatever, blah, 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 all these different psychological techniques and the ways they try to manipulate your mind. But the fundamental point of that is they wouldn't be spending all of this time and money and resources and energy trying to propagandize the public if the public's perception and the public's beliefs and the public's understanding of the world wasn't important. It is important what's going on between your ears. That is the ultimate important thing. The information war, the battle for people's minds, is the most important thing that is going on, because clearly the people still have the power. It is still billions of people who more or less are regular people trying to get by, don't want to start wars and kill people, and aren't crazy, just trying to get by. But there's a little bit of this parasitic entity on top that puppets and steers so many of them, because they can control their mind. And it's the old adage, no one is more enslaved than those who falsely believe that they are free. Well, that requires so much propaganda, and there's so much energy spent on lying to the public and trying to skew their perceptions and get them to be on board with the war on terror, whatever that means. We're against Al-Qaeda this week, but wait, Al-Qaeda's our friends in Syria, so okay, we're on board with Al-Qaeda now. I mean, whatever it takes, they could do whatever mental flips that they need to. So the real solution then, the real thing that we have to do is the revolution of the mind, is to get people to understand, to see and understand this alternative perspective and to realize that the kind of battle, the political battles that are presented to us are false dialogues. They're false dialectics between one controlled position and another controlled position. And no matter what way that smashes out, it's going to be bad. It's going to go in the direction that the people who want to take control of the situation is. There are completely other directions we could go. An example of that is like the internet censorship.
Yeah.
YouTube and Facebook and all these are cracking down on whoever this week, right wingers, left wingers, whatever, who cares? Well, then the answer is government regulation. And there you go. Now we're going to have a good system. No. What about the other idea? We don't have to use YouTube and Facebook and all these platforms. It is not, no one has the gun to your head to make these into the monopolies that they so desire to be. The government coming in and regulating it will make them into monopolies. But no, we have the choice. We can pursue alternatives, and it may be harder, but if we understand why we need alternatives and why we need to support them and why our participation in the process is important, then we can actually make a difference. But it all comes back down to that why. And if we can really show the why to people, we can have a marked difference in the impact. And that's exactly why they are trying to clamp down on the internet and the free flow of information on it, because they know this is making a difference. We are having an effect.
It's like we have to teach them what the motives are of these people, and we have to teach people to think critically so that they can for themselves discern, assume when you watch the media, assume they're out to deceive you. What would be, jump into their shoes? What would you do if you're really clever?
That's one of the basic forms of media literacy that we should all be learning. Just take the adversarial position when you're being presented an argument. Okay, so they're saying this. So what are they not telling me? Who are they not talking to? What are they not talking about? Right. What about the information they're presenting? Has that been manipulated? What source is it coming from? All of these basic things you have to do whenever you're encountering any source. And that goes back to the fundamental question, what sources do I trust or what do I don't trust? Again, that's an individual case-by-case basis. And even mixed in with lies, there's usually truth. And how can you sort those things out? Just basic points about this is what's important. And again, as I say, not everyone has the ability or the time to go through that process with all the information they're encountering. And hey, I'm not on a high horse. Me too. If I'm not mechanically inclined, if something's wrong with my car, I'm going to have to take it to a mechanic. And I might take it to a second mechanic to get a second opinion, but at any rate, at some point, I'm going to have to trust that this guy isn't trying to screw me over.
Somebody's got it.
So we all have to delegate some of our authority at certain times to different people, and we all have to have some sort of system in place for, how much can I trust this, and is this guy trying to screw me over? And sometimes you might get screwed over, but at any rate, you put that into your engine and calculate that again. So next time, hopefully, you'll be better prepared. These are the types of things we all have to be doing constantly all the time, and it is work. This is the thing that no one wants to hear. This is why it's not a satisfying answer.
Right.
There is no basic, easy switch. Flip it, and now you trust this or that. No, you have to work constantly. It is an uphill battle, and most people aren't going to do that if there is an easy, convenient way for them to go. Which is one reason why we should be building easy and convenient alternatives. There's no reason why BitTorrent or whatever has to be so complicated that the average person can't use it. We have to take some of those basic design features that YouTube and whatever else are so good at doing and try to build them into the alternatives. And that's for everything else. The alternative currency systems and whatever else we come up with there has to be easy on-ramps for people, because that's just human nature.
So this is one of the things I think leading up to that is what I like about what your program does is it doesn't focus on you try to ignore, it seems like, what the mainstream media is talking about, because usually what the mainstream media is talking about is propaganda and designed to get you to not look at what really should be looked at. And so what's interesting is there's something that the media was ignoring that just happened to become mainstream news now, like connected to the Pizzagate and the Epstein and all the sex trafficking. They were ignoring it, calling it, poo-pooing it, saying it was a conspiracy theory. But now it's mainstream news. They've arrested him, and now it's a big deal. Why do you think they made that shift? What's going on there, do you think?
Excellent question, and it remains to be seen, because it remains to be seen how this plays out. Hey, look, I'm not one of these MAGA QAnon guys. I'm not into that. I just don't believe it. But
that's why we like you.
Hey, if it were true, I wouldn't be totally happy with it, because I still don't want to trust the good guys in the intelligence agencies. even if some sort of aspect of this were true and they really are, don't worry, they got a secret plan and they're going to crack down on all this. Well, hey, good. I'm not going to stop that process. I mean, if that's the way it plays out, great.
Stupid and it's not realistic, but if it is happening, then great.
Yeah, sure, exactly. I'm not holding my breath. Let's put it that way. But you never know. And sometimes these people do get scapegoated, and sometimes there are different factions, and when they fight, the knives might come out, and who knows, but there's some interesting things may be revealed. That's why we have to watch very carefully the development of the story, and we'll see if Epstein commits suicide in jail or whatever it is. I mean, who knows, but some interesting things are going to happen.
In the jail.
In the jail. Well, that's something that we just came across recently, going back to before 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing. There's a lawyer here in Salt Lake whose brother was thought to have been, John Doe number 2, and he was, he suicided himself in prison, and when they found the real John Doe number 2, he died in the exact same way. And so we've recently got the actual statements and affidavits from Terry Nichols. And so going through that data, but the same type of thing can happen.
I forgot about that. That's another thing I know about Utah, because I have interviewed Jesse Trinidad before about his brother. I have the Nichols declaration up on my site. So yeah, I've talked about this before.
Well, he gave us the transcript of his interview with that guy in jail that apparently nobody has had.
Yep. And the judge tried to keep him from talking to anyone. This is the only thing that's ever come out from it. Yeah, pretty amazing, incredible story. Again, if you presented this to people who were not being cognitive dissonance and had not built up mental barriers around it, just in and of itself, it's a crazy story, an incredible story that deserves attention. But for some reason, it doesn't get attention.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see it on Lou Rockwell's. He did a number on it on a podcast. That's how I found out about it years ago.
So before we let you go, I know we're running out of time on our side as well. Something else we want to let you know about Utah that maybe you haven't known before is we know about Skull and Bones at Yale, but what I think most people don't realize is there's a second Skull and Bones chapter that we recently discovered, and it's at the University of Utah.
I had no idea about that.
And there's been a lot of major players, political leaders, of course. It was started by a Yale alumni in 1919, came out to Utah and started at the university here. Mm. And so we've been able to find a lot of it.
Called Skull and Bones?
It's called Skull and Bones, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Because I know there are a lot of those types of things all around the U.S. University system. True Stream Media had a great video up about that about a year or two ago. I can't remember the name of it, something about secret societies. And they went through all these different secret societies at many different universities all around the U.S. I don't know if that Utah Skull and Bones was in there, but if not, I'd definitely like to check it out.
Yeah.
It's so have we. We haven't been able to find too much about it, but have we?
That was 1919.
Trying to find their tomb.
So we can go and spray paint it.
That was 1919, you said?
Correct, yeah.
And do you know the name of the Yale that came out and started it?
I haven't been able to find out who that was. I've just gotten some of the documents written by the Skull and Bones people here in Utah, and they haven't, at least that I've found, they didn't name them. They just said Skull and Bones alumni from Yale came out and started it.
It probably wasn't Prescott, but might have been.
Doubt it was a Bush. So
I wanted to ask, I know every once in a while you do make mention of natural law in your show. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to hear you talk about it for a couple of minutes of if you prescribe to it, how you do it, what is your, in my study of natural law is really a religious one. And I was just curious what your study of natural law, what its perspective comes from. And if you just tell me about it a little bit.
Right. Well, my caveat would be that I haven't done a lot of legal scholarship research or anything. So I don't have a well-formed philosophy or well-informed history of it. But it seems to me quite apparent that our conception of law as being something that is gavelled down by a judge or something that is legislated, even worse, legislated, let's write a law and now it is the law. That there's something fundamentally so jarringly wrong about that we have so internalized that we don't even think about it. It's like, oh, they passed a new law today and now it's illegal to do this. Really? Well, why? Like, does something change in the universe now? The moral fabric of the universe has changed. No, of course not. Now it's just that this group of people have decided for the rest of the. So it seems to me there has to be something more at base. And the obvious thing to say is, well, there is some form of natural law, and I don't care what religious belief you subscribe to or don't subscribe to. We all, as human beings, we know this intuitively, unless you're psychopathic. Perhaps it is truly different if you don't perceive a moral element to the universe. I mean, there is some sort of moral fabric or dimension or whatever it is that I think we are attuned to go out and to aggressively kill someone, to steal the resources or whatever. We all know that is wrong, again, unless you're a psychopath. So that is in tune with natural law, whatever that is and wherever it comes from. But whatever they passed in, whatever new bylaw they passed in, Salt Lake City Council yesterday, is that in tune with natural law? No, of course not. It's something to do with. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have any value. Of course, in any community, in any society, you're going to have to decide on boundaries and different things and negotiating different situations. And so I understand common law and how it develops over time because, we understand in this community that if you do this, then there's this consequence. I get that, and that makes sense to me, but it still has to boil down to something, and there has to be some underlying basis to it.
Just south of Salt Lake recently, just a couple of weeks ago, this lady was charged with a misdemeanor because her cat was lying on her lawn. And so, I mean, this kind of, like you say, of course that doesn't go along with natural law.
And that's just stupid. But it can also be insidious. It's like you can be charged in numerous municipalities around the United States for trying to feed the homeless. What kind of, that infuriates me in every possible way, in every sense. Yeah. Who could presume to have the authority to legislate against something like that, and why? It's just mind-boggling, and it's disgusting.
Pasteurized dogs.
But again, there are so many issues where they kind of, you can be bamboozled by the sort of legislative side of it, or what some judge said, or the Supreme Court ruled this. But when you boil it down to natural law, it makes no sense. Because you played a D sus2 and a C add 9 and a G, and now if I take my fingers and I try to do that on my guitar, no, because there's a copyright, and I have a copyright on that, so you can't use your fingers to make those magic sounds or make those magic notes with your mouth hole. That's against the law. Yeah. What law? And what possible way could that arise in a natural law system? It cannot. You cannot own ideas. That's one of those things where you look at it from that perspective, it takes on a whole different light than all this legislative nonsense that's piled up on top of it and that we've been indoctrinated into.
So James, you would be a subscriber then of the non-aggression principle?
Yes, I would, very heartily so. It's the only thing that makes moral sense to me. Again, anyone who's trying to argue for anything else is just saying implicitly, I agree that we can use violence to get what we want, in this case, when it suits my purposes.
I gotta tell you one thing.
And then we gotta go.
One thing before I let you go. So, like last year, you guys on New World Next Week talked about that nurse in Salt Lake City that got arrested for not basically.
Yep.
DNA
I vaguely recall it. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to let you know, my first response to that story was, we made New World Next Week.
You're so proud that Utah would do that.
And when that happened, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could tell Corbett that ridiculous story? And here I am, like a year later.
True. But here's my counter question to you. So what happened? What's the updates on that?
Basically, I guess a little hell went through, and then nothing happened to her.
She won a settlement.
She won a
settlement. Like $600,000 or something.
Oh. So the state made a mess, and we paid for it. It was fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's great.
That's the justice. Yeah.
My favorite. Yeah, pretend legislation at its finest. Just all around.
James, we're really grateful to have some of your time, and we're going to give a hearty shout out to you on the radio for your Patreon and your channel and your website. So
we do play your segments randomly
on
the
we do.
radio sometimes.
You've been on our radio show.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's what it's for. Keep spreading it. Thank you.
CorbettReport.com. And you can find them also on YouTube at Corbett Report. And
But don't watch it there. Watch it at CorbettReport.com.
yeah, there you go. There you go. Or BitChute or wherever you see it. And find them on Patreon for sure.
So, hey, thanks again. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.
The Corbett Report is brought to you by the Corbett Report subscriber, a weekly newsletter featuring James Corbett's International Forecaster editorial, recommended reading and viewing, discounts on Corbett Report DVDs, and once a month, a subscriber-only video. Sign up today to start receiving your copy at corbettreport.com/support.